Azula was the fiery princess of the Fire Nation, born to the formidable Fire Lord Ozai and Ursa, and part of a complex royal lineage that includes her younger brother Zuko and her half-sister Kiyi. Upon a relentless pursuit of Avatar Aang and her exiled sibling, she led her friends Mai and Ty Lee across the vast expanse of the Earth Kingdom. Blessed with an unparalleled mastery of firebending, Azula was not only a force of nature, but a cunning manipulator driven by an insatiable thirst for power. Her strategic brilliance was showcased through the audacious coup of Ba Sing Se, the pinnacle of Earth Kingdom might, and her cunning tactics thwarted the invasion on the fateful day of Black Sun. Azula grappled with profound psychological turmoil, convinced that her mother favored Zuko over her. Raised in the shadow of her father's stern rule, deprived of maternal guidance, Azula relentlessly pursued perfection to earn his elusive affection. The betrayal of her closest allies, Mai and Ty Lee, shattered the fragile facade that she had carefully crafted. As the imminent coronation approached during Sozin's Comet, Azula stood on the brink of ascending to the throne, only to suffer a crushing defeat at the hands of her brother Zuko and the waterbender Katara. The loss triggered a catastrophic unraveling of her already fragile psyche. Subsequently confined to a mental health facility for recovery, Azula's journey took a precarious turn as she joined forces with Team Avatar in their quest to find Ursa, concealing her true intentions of treachery and reclaiming power. Yet, upon the culmination of their mission, Azula vanished from under the team's watchful eye, leaving her motives and whereabouts shrouded in uncertainty. Emerging from the shadows of her exile, Azula staged a clandestine comeback to the heart of the Fire Nation capital. Confronting the bitter reality of her dashed aspirations for the throne, she pivoted her strategy towards a more subtle manipulation of her brother, Zuko, with ambitions of ruling through him. Crafting an elaborate facade, Azula adopted the persona of the enigmatic Kamurikage, surrounded by a cadre of devoted female supporters. Employing fear as her weapon, she coerced Tucano into wielding threats against Zuko, only to find her schemes thwarted. Undeterred, Azula escalated her tactics to disturbing heights, orchestrating the abduction of innocent children within the capital, plunging the city into chaos and unrest. Despite Zuko and his allies mounting a daring rescue mission, Azula and her cohort slipped away into the night, leaving behind a trail of turmoil and uncertainty. Today, we are going to go through the complete Azula timeline. History. Early life. In the opulent realm of the Fire Nation, Princess Azula emerged into the world in 85 AG as the cherished offspring of Prince Ozai and Princess Ursa. Raised amidst the splendor befitting royalty, Azula's prodigious intellect and mastery of firebending swiftly elevated her to the apex of attention and admiration, earning her the coveted status of her father's favored child. From the earliest stages of her upbringing, Azula was groomed by Ozai as the rightful heir, imparting upon her a deep understanding of political intricacies and entrusting her with his confidences. Enrolling in the prestigious Royal Fire Academy for Girls further embellished her reputation, where she forged enduring friendships with Mai and Ty Lee, scions of esteemed Fire Nation nobility. Despite a semblance of harmony in her relationship with her brother Zuko during their formative years, familial dynamics soured over time, exacerbated by parental favoritism and perceived slights. Azula's festering envy towards her mother's apparent affection for Zuko, and Ozai's overt partiality ignited a maelstrom of resentment within her, fueling her descent into cruelty and manipulation. Fueled by a voracious appetite for power and an unyielding fear of loneliness, Azula navigated the intricate web of palace intrigue with calculated precision, orchestrating a symphony of deception and malice to maintain her tenuous grip on those around her. At the tender age of 10, Azula's world tilted on its axis. The tragic demise of her cousin Lu Ten during the siege of Ba Sing Se heralded a seismic shift in her destiny. She stumbled upon a clandestine exchange between her father, Ozai, and her grandfather, Azulon, unearthing a chilling revelation of familial betrayal. Azula absorbed the sinister plot unfurling before her. Azulon's decree to sacrifice her beloved brother Zuko as retribution for Ozai's ambition. In a daring act of defiance, Azula sounded the alarm, urging Zuko to flee the palace's suffocating grip. Yet, her calculated maneuverings unwittingly triggered a chain of events that would reshape the very fabric of the Fire Nation's ruling elite. Azula bore witness to the harrowing Agni Kai between Zuko and their father. A chilling smirk graced her lips as the flames of triumph consumed her, heralding the dawn of her ascent to power within the inner sanctum of the Fire Nation hierarchy. With Zuko's banishment, Azula emerged as the prodigious protege of Ozai, honing her formidable skills in firebending, strategy, and combat with unrelenting zeal. Her mastery of the flames transcended mere proficiency, manifesting in the ethereal azure hue of her fire and the crackle of lightning at her command, marking her as a force to be reckoned with. Spring 100 AG. Azula was granted command of a Fire Nation royal sloop, complete with a seasoned crew, and set sail in pursuit of Zuko and Iroh's whereabouts. Approaching the port, she addressed her crew with steely resolve, making it clear that any hesitation in fulfilling their mission, even if it meant apprehending members of the royal family, would not be tolerated. Before dismissing them, she savored the palpable fear emanating from her subordinates. However, her plans hit a snag when the ship's captain informed her that the tides prevented an immediate docking. Irritated by the delay, Azula subtly reminded him of the consequences should he fail to comply with her orders. Tracking down Zuko and Iroh to a village resort, Azula attempted to deceive them with false promises of reconciliation, but her own captain's blunder exposed their true intentions, leading to a chaotic confrontation that resulted in Azula being thrown overboard, allowing her targets to escape. Undeterred, Azula assembled a formidable team comprising of her childhood friends Ty Lee, recruited from a circus, and Mai, the governor's daughter in Omashu. Though failing to capture Aang and his companions, she successfully subdued the city's resistance, renaming it New Ozai in her father's honor. Her relentless pursuit of the Avatars Zuko and Iroh continued, employing innovative tactics such as the tank train. In a skirmish in Tu Zin, she managed to locate them and inflict injury upon Iroh before making a swift retreat. Following the setback of the failed attempt to breach Ba Sing Se's formidable outer wall using a Fire Nation drill, Azula and her cohorts encountered the formidable Kyoshi warriors under Suki's leadership. Swiftly overpowering them, Azula had Suki imprisoned in the high-security confines of the Boiling Rock, hoping to break her spirit. Undeterred, Azula, along with Ty Lee and Mai, adopted disguises to infiltrate Ba Sing Se. There, they orchestrated a cunning conspiracy alongside the duplicitous minister Long Feng, orchestrating the arrest of the Earth King's highest-ranking generals and facilitating Azula's personal coup. Despite Sokka and Toph's valiant efforts to warn Earth King Kui, they too fell into Azula's grasp, landing in a separate dungeon. However, Azula's meticulously laid plans faced a sudden twist when Long Feng attempted to betray her. With calculated finesse, she turned the tables, rallying the Dai Li to her cause and seizing control of the palace. In a fateful encounter in the upper ring, Azula confronted her estranged brother Zuko, successfully persuading him to join her in reclaiming his birthright as Crown Prince. The culmination of their schemes climaxed in a cataclysmic showdown with the Avatar beneath the city, where Azula's lightning strike mortally wounded Aang just as he entered the Avatar state, securing victory for the Fire Nation and forever altering the fate of the Earth Kingdom capital. Summer 100 AG. Following the fall of Ba Sing Se, Azula orchestrated the return of herself, her friends, and her brother Zuko to the Fire Nation. Before departing the Earth Kingdom capital, she appointed Judy as its supreme bureaucratic administrator, relinquishing her rule over the city. Additionally, she brought her uncle Iroh back in chains, sentencing him to imprisonment in the capital city prison complex for his perceived betrayal. Back in the Fire Nation, Azula and Zuko were hailed as war heroes, welcomed by enthusiastic crowds. However, Azula harbored suspicions about the Avatar's demise and doubted her brother's honesty. To preempt any potential revelations, she falsely informed their father that Zuko had vanquished the Avatar, setting him up for further disgrace if the truth were to surface. Embarking on a brief respite to Ember Island with her companions, Azula seized the chance to shed her royal persona and taste a semblance of a normal life. It was a rare moment of vulnerability for her as she confided her inner turmoil and resentment towards her mother to Zuko, acknowledging the painful truth of her perceived monstrosity. As tensions simmered within the Fire Nation leadership, Azula attended a pivotal war meeting alongside her brother, father, and esteemed generals. Proposing the utilization of Sozin's Comet to annihilate the Earth Kingdom once and for all, she encountered resistance from Zuko, whose dissent foreshadowed his eventual defection from the nation. After infiltrating the Earth Kingdom, Azula gained intelligence about the impending invasion and promptly alerted the Fire Lord, facilitating the royal family's evacuation to an underground bunker prior to the attack. With Azula's strategic intervention, the Fire Army managed to stall Aang, Sokka, and Toph's search for Fire Lord Ozai until the eclipse concluded, enabling them to retaliate forcefully once their bending abilities were restored, thus quashing the invasion. Subsequently, Azula, accompanied by Mai and Ty Lee, ventured to the Boiling Rock, where Zuko had been captured while attempting to rescue Hakoda from the high-security prison. Amidst a daring escape attempt, Mai's allegiance shifted as she aided the captives, much to Azula's fury. In a moment of betrayal, Ty Lee intervened to protect Mai, prompting Azula to imprison both former friends for their perceived treachery. Undeterred by setbacks, Azula led a squadron of Fire Nation airships to the Western Air Temple, engaging Zuko in a fierce battle. Though her tactics failed to eliminate Zuko and Aang, Azula's cunning allowed her to narrowly escape death by using her hairpin as a makeshift anchor. Despite the outcome, she smirked as the Avatar and his allies slipped through her fingers, evading capture once more. As Ozai departed to harness the cataclysmic power of Sozin's Comet for his grand conquest of the Earth Kingdom, he bestowed upon Azula the unexpected title of Fire Lord. Startled by this sudden elevation, Azula learned that her rule over the homeland would coincide with her father's ascension to the exalted position of Phoenix King, poised to reign supreme over the entire world. In the lead-up to her coronation, Azula found herself grappling with mounting pressure fueled by the betrayals of her friends, the weight of her newfound authority, and the gnawing deterioration of her mental well-being. Her growing paranoia led her to purge her inner circle, banishing servants, advisors, and even trusted Dai Li agents. As the ceremony approached, Azula's fragile facade crumbled further, culminating in a disturbing confrontation with her own reflection. Haunted by hallucinations of her mother, Ursa, Azula grappled with conflicting emotions, acknowledging her reliance on fear as a means of control, while yearning for her mother's love and acceptance. The arrival of Zuko and Katara at the palace marked a pivotal moment of reckoning. Engaging Zuko in a heated Agni Kai, Azula's attacks grew increasingly erratic and desperate, mirroring her unraveling psyche. In a tragic turn, her assault on Katara inadvertently led to Zuko's grave injury, shattering the illusion of her invincibility. Defeated and stripped of her delusions of grandeur, Azula succumbed to a torrent of anguish and despair, ensnared in ice and chains by Katara's cunning manipulation. With a fiery roar of defiance, she crumbled, a broken reflection of her former self, consumed by the harsh reality of her downfall. After the 100-Year War, following her devastating Agni Kai with Zuko and the subsequent unraveling of her sanity, Azula's descent into madness evoked a sense of pity from her brother. Rather than facing imprisonment like her father, Ozai, she was instead committed to an asylum on a nearby island, where her every move was meticulously monitored. Despite Azula's initial disdain for her confinement, she found an unexpected camaraderie among fellow patients at the facility. Approximately a year later, Zuko paid her a visit, disclosing his fruitless attempts to uncover their mother's whereabouts through consultations with Ozai. In a surprising display of altruism, Azula offered her assistance to Zuko without expecting anything in return, expressing a shared curiosity about their mother's mysterious disappearance 6 years prior. During a tense reunion with her father orchestrated by Zuko, Azula's volatile temperament surfaced once more. Frustrated by her constrained state, she lashed out, prompting Ty Lee to intervene and temporarily immobilize her. Despite her mental instability, Azula grappled with profound questions about her mother's ability to overcome the fear she had once held over her. As tension simmered, Zuko attempted to foster the semblance of normalcy by offering tea, only to inadvertently provoke Azula's ire. Her insistence on maintaining a facade of dignity in the presence of her father led to a standoff, ultimately prompting Zuko to retreat, leaving Azula to wrestle with the demons of her fractured psyche alone. As Zuko escorted Azula to her former quarters within the palace, he broached the delicate subject of her interactions with Ozai regarding their mother's whereabouts. Skirting the inquiry, Azula deflected by probing Zuko about his experiences with chi blocking. With meticulous detail, she described the sensation, illustrating how one regains control after a period of flexibility. In a startling display of agility and cunning, Azula exploited a moment of vulnerability to break free from her restraints, unleashing a lightning bolt at her unsuspecting brother. Seizing the opportunity, she darted into a nearby building, eventually uncovering a cache of undelivered letters penned by Ursa to her hometown within one of Ozai's secret chambers. Despite Zuko's attempts to intervene, Azula ruthlessly incinerated the letters, though she clandestinely retained one containing potentially damning information regarding Zuko's lineage. Unbeknownst to her, Ursa had fabricated the contents to mislead Ozai, but Azula saw it as leverage to manipulate Zuko into relinquishing his claim to the throne. In exchange for divulging the contents of the preserved letter, Azula bargained to accompany Zuko on his quest to find their mother, concealing her ulterior motives beneath a facade of cooperation and familial concern. In compliance with Zuko's decision, Azula was liberated from the confines of the mental institution and granted the dignity of accompanying him, unbound. However, upon revealing herself to Team Avatar, she faced immediate hostility from Katara, leading to a swift exchange of attacks. Azula deftly evaded their assaults, seizing an opportunity to provoke and belittle Sokka. Tensions escalated the following day, culminating in a brief skirmish between Azula and Sokka. Utilizing a controlled lightning shock, she disarmed him after he brandished his boomerang in threat. The intervention of the rest of Team Avatar swiftly brought the confrontation to a halt, immobilizing Azula with their bending abilities. Upon her release, she arrogantly asserted that peaceful coexistence was possible if they simply kept their distance. Accompanying Team Avatar on Appa in pursuit of her mother in Hira'a, Azula's demeanor was marked by erratic shifts, veering between unpredictability and bouts of delusions and hallucinations. Consistently fixated on the notion of her mother's involvement, she repeatedly questioned the team about how she had reached out to them. As they approached Hira'a, Azula made a desperate attempt to flee, leaping from Appa. Aang swiftly intervened, catching her midair, only to have his glider set ablaze by Azula, causing him to crash into the ground while she made her escape. Near a stream, Azula was halted by the sound of her mother's voice emanating from the water's surface. Engaging in a heated exchange with her reflection, she accused Ursa of orchestrating a conspiracy to undermine her power, fueled by jealousy and resentment. Bolstered by the purported evidence from Ursa's letter, Azula declared her intent to claim the throne from Zuko and seek retribution by hunting down and eliminating her mother herself. In a moment of anguish and defiance, Azula unleashed a lightning bolt at the mirage of her mother, dismissing the professed love as a treacherous ploy to manipulate her psyche. Despite the hallucination's affirmations of love, Azula remained steadfast in her conviction, driven by a desire to vanquish the perceived threat once and for all. At that juncture, Zuko appeared and inquired about whom she'd been conversing with. Reacting with hostility, Azula's initial instinct was to lash out at her brother, only to be swiftly ensnared in ice by Katara before she could act. Accosting the waterbender, Azula accused her of being complicit in Ursa's supposed schemes. However, their confrontation was abruptly interrupted by the sudden appearance of the Wolf Spirit, which launched an assault on the group with moth wasps. As they struggled against the onslaught, Azula implored Zuko to release her, asserting her ability to aid them. She argued that even if familial trust was absent, there was no one left to rely on. Reluctantly, Zuko acquiesced, melting her icy confinement. True to her word, Azula redirected the danger away from the group with a powerful lightning bolt, drawing the attention of the moth wasps and the wolf spirit. That evening, Azula exhibited signs of distress in her sleep, prompting Zuko to cover her with a blanket, during which he stumbled upon the concealed letter, its contents leaving him stunned. The following day, Azula was confronted by another hallucination of her mother, urging her to reconsider her path and abandon her quest for the throne. In a fit of defiance, Azula attempted to strike her mother with lightning, only to be restrained by Katara's intervention. As tensions mounted, Azula's rage subsided, leading to a moment of calm facilitated by Katara. Upon realizing that the letter had gone missing, Azula immediately suspected Zuko of theft and resorted to intimidation tactics against Sokka and Katara. Despite her efforts, Zuko was nowhere to be found, prompting Azula to pursue him, leaving behind a trail of destruction in her wake. Azula stumbled upon her brother engaged in conversation with Aang at the cliff's edge, discussing the letter that had stirred doubts about Zuko's lineage. Frustrated by this revelation, she unleashed a volley of fire blasts at him, sparking a fierce duel between siblings. As Aang hurried back to check on Sokka and Katara, Zuko seized Azula, holding her precariously over the cliff's edge while she accused their mother of betraying her by revealing the letter's whereabouts. It was then revealed that Zuko had possessed the letter all along. Seeking an end to their conflict, Zuko implored Azula to cease their skirmish, a proposition to which she reluctantly agreed. They both returned to camp where the team worked together to extinguish the fires before resuming their journey toward Hira'a. Upon reaching the border, Team Avatar adopted disguises, donning crimson robes to blend in, although Azula defiantly retained her own attire. Arriving just as a performance of Love Amongst the Dragons concluded, Azula and Zuko reminisced about their shared childhood experiences, including their reenactments of the play's battle scenes. Azula asserted her superiority in assuming the role of the Dragon Emperor, prompting nostalgic banter between the siblings. After the play, the group was introduced to Noren, the leader of the Hira'a acting troupe, who offered them tea and insights into Ursa's whereabouts. Engaging with Noren's daughter, Kiyi, Azula's attempts at camaraderie backfired when she inadvertently frightened the girl with a macabre gesture. Zuko reprimanded his sister for her insensitivity, prompting Azula to reflect on her restraint and not resorting to destructive measures, albeit with a hint of defiance. The escalating tensions between Katara and Azula led to a heated exchange, culminating in Zuko's decision to redirect their journey to Forgetful Valley as their final destination. Upon reaching Forgetful Valley, Azula took the initiative to clear a path by setting parts of the valley ablaze, once again drawing the ire of her companions. When Aang discovered a flutterbat leading him to a pond, Azula and the others followed, though tensions simmered as they navigated the spiritual locale. Aang emphasized the need for reverence, but Azula's hallucination of Ursa once more urged her to halt the mission. Ignoring Aang's plea, Azula unleashed a blast of lightning upon the pond, rebuking Aang and accusing Ursa of orchestrating their journey. As Katara moved to restrain Azula, the group came under attack by a barrage of ice projectiles, with the surrounding flora ensnaring them. In a moment of unexpected heroism, Azula rescued Sokka, justifying her actions with a cynical quip about survival. The arrival of Rapha and Misu, siblings with a connection mirroring Azula and Zuko's, prompted introspection within the royal siblings. Azula's interest in their tale was abruptly cut short as she pressed for information about Ursa. Misu revealed no knowledge of Ursa's whereabouts, prompting Azula's frustration. As Aang prepared to enter the spirit world in search of answers, Azula distanced herself, her agitation evident when confronted by Zuko. Accusing him of prioritizing the needs of strangers over their quest for their mother, Azula's paranoia resurfaced, blaming Ursa for the newcomer's presence and preparing to unleash her fury upon them. Zuko intervened just in time to halt Azula's attack, compelling her to regain her composure as they awaited Aang's return. When Aang arrived with the Mother of Faces, Azula seized the moment to press for information about Ursa. Learning that Ursa had been granted a new identity as Noriko, Azula hastily departed for Hiraa, with Zuko and Sokka in hot pursuit. Storming into Norin and Noriko's house, Azula confronted her mother, demanding answers and grappling with her own insecurities. In a moment of emotional turmoil, she prepared to unleash her fury upon Ursa, only to be momentarily deterred by Sokka. As Ursa apologized for her past failings, Azula's facade of stoicism crumbled, replaced by tears of unresolved anguish. Yet her vulnerability quickly morphed into aggression as she turned on Zuko, accusing him of denying her the throne and thus freeing himself from her burdensome presence. In a poignant exchange, Zuko affirmed their familial bond despite their tumultuous history, prompting Azula to flee, leaving behind the letter and her shattered emotions. Despite Zuko's attempts to locate her, Azula remained elusive, leaving him to ponder her intentions and inner turmoil. Masquerading as the Kumorikage. During her exile, Azula underwent a profound transformation, realizing her purported destiny, to manipulate Zuko into a Fire Lord ruling through fear. Shedding any allegiance to Ozai, she embraced Kiyi as kin and ceased experiencing hallucinations. Memories of Mai's childhood tales about the Kumorikage spirits sparked Azula's scheme to adopt their guise. Leaving Forgetful Valley, Azula aided her allies escape from a mental health institution, which also housed defiant daughters of traditionalist Fire Nation families. Pledging to her new followers promises of uplifting the downtrodden, Azula embarked on her Kumorikage persona. Under this guise, Azula confronted Ukano, leader of the new Ozai Society, demanding Zuko's ousting under threat of reprisal. When Ukano faltered, Azula pressed him to honor their pact, coercing him into constructing a prison in the royal family graveyard. Subsequently, Azula and her followers started abducting children from the capital, including Tom Tom, under the guise of serving her deceitful cause. However, unbeknownst to Ukano, Azula manipulated him for her own ends, harboring no intention of restoring Ozai to power. Sometime later, Azula abducted Kiyi, prompting Zuko, Aang, Ty Lee, and Suki to intervene. In the ensuing clash, Azula's lightning betrayed her identity. Zuko countered, but Azula deflected his attack back at him, facilitating her escape with Kiyi through a concealed passage. Locking Kiyi away with the other captives, Azula faced pressure from Zirian regarding the prolonged captivity. Calmly, Azula urged patience, assuring them of her plan. Azula and Ukano deliberated the situation, realizing the stalemate in holding the children. Ukano, distressed by Tom Tom's confinement, questioned the efficiency of their actions in aiding Ozai's ascent. Azula, dismissing Ozai's relevance, instructed Ukano to incite his safe nation society to incite unrest. Though puzzled, Ukano complied, trusting Azula's guidance. Following the turmoil, Ukano expressed frustration over the lack of progress, pleading for the children's release. Azula reneged, citing the risk of exposure if the children were set free. Holding the key to their confinement, Azula maintained her grip on the situation. Following the riot, Ukano lamented the lack of progress in their plan, emphasizing his compliance with Azula's directives and pleading for the release of the captive children. Subsequently, Azula and her allies confronted her brother, Aang, her former comrades, and Kalo. Amidst the skirmish, Mai's blades found their mark on Azula's hood. Azula taunted Mai about her knife-throwing prowess and resumed her assault. Reflecting on a past sleepover at Mai's where she overheard mention of the Kumorikage, Azula credited Mai for unwittingly inspiring their masquerade. Amidst the chaos, Azula seized Kalo and issued a threat, deriding Mai's personal connections. Zuko intervened, demanding Azula release Kalo, a move she interpreted as a futile attempt to reclaim Mai's affections. After engaging in a fiery exchange with her brother, Azula fled into a tomb resembling a lion turtle, with Zuko trailing behind. Inside, Azula revealed they were in the tomb of the first Fire Lord's most trusted advisor. Despite Zuko noting her apparent stability, Azula suddenly attacked him. Their brief Agni Kai culminated with Azula pinning Zuko down, brandishing a fire dagger over his face, asserting that it was their perennial dynamic. Defiantly, Zuko retorted that even if Azula ended his life, she would never ascend to Fire Lord, urging her to acknowledge this truth. Surprisingly, Azula relented, expressing acceptance and even embracing this realization. She disclosed that the voices in her mind had ceased once she recognized her true calling, not to claim the throne herself, but to mold Zuko into a formidable leader ruling through power and intimidation. Despite Zuko's assertion that her plans were thwarted with the children's rescue, Azula countered, asserting victory by demonstrating Zuko's latent authoritarian traits. Before she could be apprehended, she vanished in smoke, instructing Zuko to acknowledge the influence she had wielded over him. Observing Zuko's address to his subjects from a nearby rooftop, Azula and her accomplices, still disguised as the Kumorikage, watched on. Upon hearing Zuko's plea for understanding and patience as he endeavored to improve his leadership, Azula smirked to herself, sarcastically remarking on his sentimentality. Replacing her mask and hood, she and her allies faded into the shadows once more. Abandoned by the Fire Warriors. Azula persisted in leading the Fire Warriors, although their ranks had dwindled following the fallout from the Kumorikage conspiracy. Some members had been apprehended by Fire Nation authorities, while others opted to depart the organization. This fragmentation led to individual members acting independently, with Azula neither endorsing nor restraining them. In due course, Azula masterminded the obliteration of a vital grain distribution hub, aiming to destabilize Zuko's rule by disrupting the Fire Nation's food reserves. However, Ty Lee had uncovered the Fire Warrior scheme. The Kyoshi warrior had replaced the granary's supplies with empty crates and arranged for numerous guards to conceal themselves during the initial assault. Despite this setback, Azula intervened to aid her comrades, engaging Ty Lee and the domestic forces long enough for her party to flee into the surrounding forest. Despite their escape, Ty Lee and her allies had exploited their strategic advantage to capture and detain Chiyu. While the Fire Warriors set up camp in the forest, Zirin proposed a plan to return and rescue Chiyu. However, Azula coldly asserted that casualties were an inevitable aspect of war and rebuffed the idea. Zirin expressed her frustration with Azula's strategies, criticizing the Fire Warriors' risky endeavors for insignificant gains from raids on warehouses. She argued that the Fire Warriors should move beyond clandestine operations and cease undermining Zuko. Asserting her authority, Azula reminded her followers that she had provided them with a new purpose, and emphasized her prerogative to dictate the group's course of action. Satisfied that they would continue to sow chaos, Azula retired for the night. Upon awakening, Azula discovered the deserted campsite, fueling her anger. With her bending, she incinerated a Fire Warrior mask and swore to track down the traitors responsible. Struggling through the forest in a downpour, she stumbled upon what appeared to be a Fire Sage temple. Inside, she encountered a lone monk preparing a meal. The monk explained that the temple welcomed the weary and offered assistance to those in need. Observing Azula's evident turmoil, the monk urged her to stay the night for rest and solace. Azula dismissed the monk's offer, denying any troubles and asserting her determination to confront Zirin and the others. Disdainful of sleeping on the floor, she criticized the monk's hospitality and insisted on a better accommodation. Eventually, the monk relented and offered her own quarters. As Azula drifted off to sleep, she remained resolute in her vow to hold the Fire Warriors accountable. In her dream, Azula found herself back at Lo and Lee's cottage on Ember Island, greeted by her family on the beach. Iroh, Zuko, and Ursa praised her as a hero who had brought an end to the 100-Year War and was soon to be crowned Fire Lord. Ruan Jian even complimented her appearance. However, as Ursa moved to embrace her daughter and express pride, the scene dissolved, replaced by Mai and Ty Lee ridiculing her for believing the illusion. Azula angrily silenced them before waking up abruptly. The monk, surprised that the dreams did not bring her peace, urged Azula to depart. Dismissing the monk's lack of hospitality, Azula left the temple, but found herself returning to it soon after. Inside again, she confronted the distressed monk, accusing the temple of being a trap set by Zuko or Aang. However, her attention was drawn to a burnt wooden turtle duck, triggering memories of her parents finding her with the toy in her youth. Unlike her recollection, her mother expressed pride instead of fear in the vision, unsettling Azula. The monk suggested that Azula's deepest desire was to be loved and accepted by her family. Azula, however, suspected the monk's true nature as a shape-shifting spirit and attempted to attack with her firebending. As the supposed monk transformed into a less human form, Azula expressed her contempt for her family, labeling them all as traitors except for Ozai, whom she described as a mere shadow of his former self. Asserting her claim to the Fire Nation throne, Azula demanded what she believed was rightfully hers. Suddenly, Ty Lee appeared at the temple door, claiming to have tracked Azula and her group through the forest. Ignoring the spirit, Azula taunted Ty Lee for her Kyoshi warrior appearance and launched a firebending assault against her. She vented her frustration over Mai's betrayal for Zuko and then aggressively confronted Ty Lee, slamming her against the temple wall. While holding an unconscious Ty Lee, Azula was questioned by the spirit about her intentions towards her former friend. Azula, puzzled by the spirit's interest, received a response from Ursa herself, claiming her concern as a mother for her own daughter. Azula, skeptical of Ursa's presence, argued that everything in the temple felt real only in the moment. She then confronted the vision of Ursa, recounting how she felt abandoned when Ursa chose Zuko over her by poisoning Azulon and leaving. Azula expressed her belief that without Ursa's protection from Ozai, she was left vulnerable to becoming her father's lethal firebending tool, with no say in the matter. She angrily blamed Ursa for not allowing Ozai to kill Zuko, which would have allowed Azula to remain under Ursa's protection. Azula's outburst conveyed her belief that Ursa's actions were responsible for her betrayal by her family, friends, and acolytes. The apparition of Ursa then questioned Azula if her true desire was for those who had betrayed her trust to come forward, admit their wrongdoing, and seek her forgiveness, promising to never hurt her again. Azula cautiously entertained the idea, only for Ty Lee to transform into Mai, who ridiculed Azula for considering herself the victim. Azula was startled to realize that even her former friends were part of the spirit's deception, and resolved to leave the temple for good, only to discover that she couldn't escape without re-entering the room. The illusion of Mai suggested that people betrayed Azula because she was inherently vile and deserving of such treatment. Just as Azula prepared to confront Mai, she saw Ty Lee's face once more, criticizing Azula for assuming they were genuine friends after the princess had threatened her life. Azula belittled Ty Lee, asserting her superiority as a royal compared to a mere Kyoshi warrior, but Ursa reappeared displeased. As Azula attempted to dismiss these spirit trickery, visions of Mai and Zuko elucidated how Azula believed that no one could survive without her, yet she surrounded herself with individuals whom she manipulated and harmed, unable to face the world alone and confront the consequences of her actions. The apparition of Zuko took on a more grotesque form, admonishing Azula for her predicament and questioning whether she would seek forgiveness. Despite Azula's attempt to attack the vision with lightning, she boldly asserted her recognition of the spirit's deception and announced her departure. However, as she prepared to unleash her firebending, she witnessed the spirit transform into a monstrous insectoid creature, with her familial apparitions fading away. The spirit disclosed that it had not lied. Rather, it offered a chance for those who had swayed from the right path to seek redemption. Azula was informed that she had been presented with an opportunity for forgiveness, which she had spurned. The spirit then revealed its current form mirrored Azula's inner self, shaped by her cruelty and thirst for vengeance. Dismissing redemption as a notion for the weak, Azula asserted her claim to the Fire Lordship, generating lightning as she denounced meddling spirits. However, as she discharged a bolt of lightning, the temple vanished, leaving her in a forest clearing, where she acknowledged the unreality of her experience. Returning to the campsite, she found Zirin had rescued Chiyu and reunited them with the others. Despite a moment of hesitation, Azula deemed the Fire Warriors unfit for her leadership and opted not to exact revenge. Instead, she resolved to seek new followers and establish a new domain. And that, my friends, is the timeline of Azula. You know, you gotta have to feel bad for her, but considering all of the messed up stuff she did, it's hard to really feel bad for her. It's tough to really sympathize. What did you think of all this? Did you know about all of the post-100-year war shenanigans that she got up to? What is your favorite Azula moment? Do you think she ever ended up with acolytes to her liking? Make sure you let me know down in the comments, and subscribe if you want more like it, and check out some more of these videos. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.